The communication chamber fell silent as Ambassador Jake Morrison's final transmission ended. The holographic display flickered once and went dark, leaving only the faint hum of alien technology filling the vast council hall. Chairman Vextar stared at the empty space where the human representative had appeared just moments before, his three eyes blinking in confusion. In 12 years of service, Jake had never been so brief, so final. The words echoed in the chamber like a death sentence. Earth thanks the Council for the opportunity to participate. We wish you well in your future endeavors. Vexatar's assistant, a nervous Keth named Zilpak, shuffled closer to the chairman's elevated platform. His breathing apparatus wheezed softly as he spoke. Sir, should we attempt to re-establish contact with the human delegation? The question hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Vextar's tail, a long appendage that betrayed his emotions, twitched with growing unease. Something was wrong. Jake Morrison was many things: stubborn, principled, sometimes frustratingly logical. But he was never rude. This abrupt goodbye felt like a door slamming shut. The council chamber buzzed with confused chatter from the 46 other species representatives. The Corvin delegation, massive beings of living stone, rumbled their displeasure in their deep, harmonic language. The ethereal wisps floating near the ceiling flickered with agitation, their translucent forms pulsing with nervous energy. Everyone sensed that something significant had just happened, but nobody understood what. Dr. Helen Price sat in her laboratory on Europa, humanity's premier research station orbiting Jupiter. Her hands moved quickly across the control panels, initiating shutdown procedures that she had hoped never to use. Around her, the most advanced medical research facility in known space began powering down section by section. 20 years of breakthrough discoveries, treatments that had saved millions of lives across dozens of species, and research that pushed the boundaries of what the galaxy thought possible. All of it was being carefully archived and sealed. Her colleague, Dr. Amy Foster, worked in the agricultural labs 3 levels below. Amy's innovations in cross-species crop development had turned barren worlds into garden paradises. Her techniques had increased food production by rates that other species called miraculous. Now she carefully destroyed her active samples and wiped the research databases. The knowledge would leave with humanity, never to be shared again. On Kepler Station, the galaxy's busiest trade hub, Commander Pete Jackson received his orders with the same calm professionalism he had shown throughout his military career. The message was simple: full evacuation within 24 hours. No exceptions, no delays, no questions asked. Pete had seen enough battles to know when retreat was not defeat, but strategy. He began coordinating the largest withdrawal operation in human history. The human traders, researchers, diplomats, and military personnel across the galaxy received the same message simultaneously. Lisa Carter, captain of the merchant vessel Golden Eagle, was negotiating a mining contract with Zilani representatives when her communication device chimed softly. She read the message twice, excused herself politely from the negotiations, and never returned. Within 6 hours, her ship had cleared Zilani space forever. Engineer Sam Rodriguez powered down the quantum communication array he had built on Rigel Prime. The installation had taken 5 years to construct and had revolutionized galactic communications. Messages that once took months to cross space now arrived instantly through quantum entanglement networks Sam had designed. As the massive array went dark, he uploaded a simple automated message that would repeat for exactly 72 hours. System offline for scheduled maintenance. Thank you for your patience. Bob Turner, chief engineer of the asteroid mining operation in the Vega system, sealed the extraction equipment his team had developed. The machines could pull rare minerals from solid rock with efficiency that amazed alien observers. Bob had never explained that the technology operated on principles most species had not yet discovered. Now those secrets would return to Earth, locked away forever. Nurse Katie Wells finished her shift at the Interspecies Medical Center on New Geneva. She had spent 8 years treating patients from dozens of different worlds, learning to adapt human medical knowledge to alien biology. Her treatments had success rates that other medical professionals called impossible. Katie quietly deleted her research files, backed up her personal belongings, and walked out of the medical center for the last time. The evacuation proceeded with military precision across hundreds of worlds. Human colonies that had thrived for generations packed their essential belongings and abandoned everything else. Research stations went dark. Trade posts closed without explanation. Military bases transferred their assets to transport ships and departed into deep space. The other species watched in bewilderment as humanity simply vanished. There were no dramatic announcements, no final ultimatums, no angry speeches. One day, humans were integral parts of galactic society, and the next day they were gone. Ships passed empty human installations without receiving any response to their hails. Landing parties found abandoned facilities clean and intact, but completely lifeless. Chairman Vextar called emergency sessions, demanding explanations that never came. The human communication networks had gone silent across the entire galaxy. Trade agreements expired without renewal. Defense pacts became meaningless when one side no longer existed. Research projects collapsed when human scientists simply stopped appearing for work. Within 48 hours, it was as if humanity had never existed beyond their home solar system. 6 months had passed since the humans disappeared, and Throckmore was starting to panic. The massive Corvin stood before the mining equipment that Bob Turner had left behind, his stone-like hands trembling as he tried to understand why the extraction. Rates kept dropping. The machines still worked, but not like they had when Bob was there. What used to pull 1,000 tons of rare minerals per day now barely managed 400 tons. Throckmore's engineering team gathered around him, their heavy footsteps echoing in the cavern. They had studied the equipment for months, taken it, apart piece by piece, analyzed every component with their best technology. The machines were simple enough on the surface: drill assemblies, refinement chambers, transport systems. But somehow, when Bob operated them, they had performed miracles. "The quantum resonance chambers are running at 60% efficiency," reported his assistant, a younger Corvin named Veltar. "We cannot determine why. The settings match exactly what Turner programmed." Throckmore's rumbling voice filled the cavern with frustration. He had worked alongside Bob for 3 years, watching the human make adjustments that seemed random but always improved performance. Now those same adjustments made no sense at all. The Corvin Mining Consortium was not alone in their struggles. Across the galaxy, the absence of humanity was creating problems that grew worse each day. The peaceful trade routes, established and protected by human patrol ships for decades, had become hunting grounds for pirates. Captain Lisa Carter's former patrol route through the Vega sector, once the safest passage in known space, now saw 3 merchant ships attacked every week. Commander Zexhai of the Zalani Defense Force tried to fill the gap left by human patrols. His ships were faster than the old human vessels, his weapons more powerful, his sensors more advanced. Yet somehow, pirates slipped through his defenses like shadows through moonlight. The human early warning systems had detected threats that Zalani technology could not even see. How did they know? Zexhai asked his tactical officer after another failed intercept. The human ships were older, slower, less armed than ours, but they stopped every pirate attack in this sector for 20 years. We cannot stop even half of them. The tactical officer had no answer. The Zalani had studied human combat recordings, analyzed their patrol patterns, even hired former pirates to explain human tactics. Nothing made sense. On the medical station orbiting Kepler Prime, Dr. Mordun faced his own crisis. The Zalani physician had worked closely with Dr. Alan Brooks for 8 years, learning treatments for cross-species medicine that had revolutionized healthcare across the galaxy. Now, without Alan's guidance, those treatments were failing one by one. The bone rot that plagued elderly Zalani had returned with a vengeance. Alan's treatment had reduced infection rates by 90%, using a combination of human antibiotics and Zalani cellular therapy. Dr. Mordun had the exact same medications, the same equipment, the same procedures, but his patients were dying, at rates not seen in decades. "I do not understand," he told his medical team during their morning briefing. "The treatment protocols are identical. The medications are the same. But the cellular integration fails in 70% of cases." His head nurse, a Keth named Silwen, suggested they might be missing some crucial step. But Alan's procedures were detailed down to the smallest measurement. Nothing was missing, yet nothing worked. Similar problems plagued the agricultural colonies that had thrived under Dr. Amy Foster's innovations. On New Eden, a farming world that fed 6 systems, the crop yields had dropped by half. The Terran seeds Amy had developed still grew, but not with the vigor they had shown under her care. The soil treatment programs she had established still ran automatically, but the results were disappointing. Administrator Helgon, a patient wisp who managed New Eden's agriculture, floated through the failing fields with growing despair. Amy's techniques had turned his marginal world into a breadbasket that supported millions of beings. Her methods seemed simple: crop rotation, soil enrichment, genetic adaptation. But every attempt to expand or modify her techniques resulted in failure. The human called it intuitive farming, Helgon told his agricultural staff. She said she could feel what the plants needed. I assumed it was metaphor. Now he was not so sure. Amy had made adjustments to growing conditions that made no sense according to any agricultural science he knew. Yet those adjustments had tripled crop yields on worlds where other species struggled to grow anything at all. The communication networks that Sam Rodriguez had built began showing stress fractures without his maintenance. The quantum entanglement, arrays that enabled instant galactic communication, required constant fine-tuning that alien engineers could not master. Message delays grew longer each week. What had been real-time conversation across light years slowly degraded to messages that took hours or days to transmit. Chief Engineer Corvell of the Communication Authority stared at diagnostic reports that made no sense. "The quantum matrices are stable," he reported to his supervisor. "Power levels are normal. All components function within specifications. But transmission coherence degrades continuously." His team had replaced components, upgraded software, even rebuilt entire sections of the network. Nothing helped. The economic impact spread like ripples from a dropped stone. Trade agreements that depended on instant communication began failing when negotiations took weeks instead of minutes. Shipping schedules collapsed when cargo manifests could not be transmitted in real time. Banking systems that relied on quantum-secured transfers started experiencing delays that caused market panic. Chairman Vextar watched reports flood in from across the galaxy. Mining production down 40%. Trade route security compromised. Medical treatment success rates plummeting. Agricultural output falling. Communication networks degrading. Each report painted the same picture. Systems that had worked perfectly for decades were now failing without human involvement. "Perhaps we should attempt to contact Earth directly," suggested his chief advisor, an elderly Corvin named Tholmar. "Surely they will respond to official council communications." Vextar had been thinking the same thing, but part of him feared what they might find. The humans had left without explanation, without anger, without demands. That kind of departure suggested a decision that would not be easily changed. The first expedition to Sol's system was already being planned, but deep in his 3-chambered heart. Vextar suspected that when they reached Earth, they would find answers they did not want to hear. The alarm that shattered the morning calm on Council Station was unlike anything Vextar had heard in his 40 years of service. Red lights flashed throughout the command center, while technicians rushed between control stations with expressions of pure terror. The galactic defense grid, humanity's greatest gift to civilized space, had just gone completely dark. "Status report," Vextar demanded as he entered the crisis chamber, his ceremonial robes flowing behind him. Chief Engineer Corvell, his usually steady voice cracking with strain, turned from the main display screen. "Chairman, we have lost all contact with the outer warning stations. The quantum entanglement network has suffered complete cascade failure. We are effectively blind to any threats from beyond our borders." The implications hit Vexitar like a physical blow. For 30 years, Sam Rodriguez's early warning system had protected civilized space from the horrors that lurked in the dark. Regions between galaxies, hostile fleets, reality-warping entities, resource-hungry swarms, all had been detected and dealt with long before they could threaten inhabited worlds. Now that protection was gone. On the outer rim colony of Havens, Edge Governor Meltara received the news with growing dread. Her world was one of the first that would face any extragalactic threat, and without early warning, they would have no time to prepare defenses or evacuate civilians. The human garrison that had protected her system for decades was gone, taking with them the defensive strategies that had turned hopeless battles into miraculous victories. "How long before the savage worlds realize we are vulnerable?" she asked her military advisor, a grizzled Corvan veteran named Tokvar. The answer came, sooner than expected. Within 6 hours of the defense grid failure, long-range sensors detected massive fleet movements from the Andromeda Spiral. The savage worlds, as civilized species called them, were already moving. Commander Pete Jackson's former base on Frontier. Station stood empty and dark. The defensive installations he had designed still functioned, but without his tactical genius, they were just expensive decorations. The automated systems could track incoming threats and calculate firing solutions, but they lacked the intuitive understanding that had made Pete's defenses legendary. Lieutenant Haxter of the Zalani Defense Corps studied Pete's strategic files with desperate intensity. Every battle the human had fought was documented in precise detail. Troop movements, weapon deployments, timing sequences. But reading about Pete's tactics was like reading sheet music without understanding melody. The notes were all there, but the music was missing. He would deploy forces in patterns that violated every principle of military science, Haxter explained to his staff. His formations looked weak, his positions seemed indefensible, yet he never lost a single battle. In 15 years of frontier duty, the lieutenant pulled up a recording of Pete's final victory before humanity's departure. "Watch this. He places his heavy weapons behind the enemy's probable advance, not in front of it. He divides his forces when doctrine demands concentration. He retreats when he should attack, attacks when he should retreat. It makes no sense." The agricultural crisis that had begun on worlds like New Eden was spreading throughout civilized space. Dr. Amy Foster's farming techniques had been the backbone of food production on over 200 worlds. Without her knowledge, crop failures cascaded through the food distribution network like a plague. Planets that had supported millions now struggled to feed thousands. On the farming world of Green Meadows, Agricultural Administrator Nixwell watched his crops die, despite having followed Amy's procedures exactly. The soil analysis matched her requirements perfectly. The seed varieties were identical to those she had used. The climate control systems maintained the exact conditions she had specified. Yet the plants withered and died as if the life had simply gone out of them. "She spoke to them," whispered his chief botanist, a elderly wisp named Velmar. "I watched her work for 7 years. She would walk through the fields and somehow know what each plant needed. She called it instinct, but it was more than that. She understood something about life that we do not." The medical crisis was equally devastating. On the hospital station orbiting Rigel Prime, Dr. Morden faced his worst nightmare as the epidemic. Diseases that Alan Brooks had controlled began returning with a vengeance. The Keth respiratory syndrome that Alan had reduced to a minor annoyance was now killing thousands. His treatments that had seemed so simple and straightforward failed, in case after case. The human understanding of biology was different from ours, Dr. Morden told the Emergency Medical Council. We study organs and systems and cellular processes. He seemed to understand the whole being, how physical health connected to mental state, how social bonds affected healing, how hope itself could be medicine. The council listened in silence as their own mortality became suddenly real again. The communication network that Sam Rodriguez had built was collapsing faster each day. Quantum entanglement arrays that had operated flawlessly for decades now suffered random failures that alien engineers could not predict or prevent. The network that had united hundreds of worlds was fragmenting into isolated islands of communication. On Communication Hub 7, Chief Technician Morgek stared at readings that defied explanation. The quantum matrices were perfectly aligned. The power flow was stable. The environmental controls maintained optimal conditions. Yet the entanglement coherence degraded by 2% every day with mathematical precision. It is as if the system is deliberately forgetting how to work, he reported to his superiors, as if it needs something we cannot provide. The economic collapse accelerated as communication delays made galactic trade increasingly impossible. Banks could not verify transactions across light years when messages took days instead of seconds. Shipping companies could not coordinate deliveries when cargo manifests arrived weeks after the ships themselves. Manufacturing chains that spanned dozens of worlds fell apart when components arrived without orders or orders arrived without components. On the industrial world of Ironheart, factory manager Belthar shut down the assembly lines that had produced advanced technology for half the galaxy. Without the human consultants, we cannot maintain quality standards, he announced to his workforce. Without communication networks, we cannot coordinate with suppliers. Without trade routes, we cannot ship products. We are returning to planetary-scale manufacturing until the crisis passes. But the crisis was not passing. It was accelerating. Each failed system created new problems that caused other systems to fail. The intricate web of interdependence that had held galactic civilization together was unraveling thread by thread, and at the center of every break was the absence of human knowledge and human intuition. Chairman Vexatar stood in his private office, looking out at the stars that no longer seemed safe or familiar. Reports from across the galaxy painted the same picture, a civilization that had grown dependent on human contributions without ever understanding how essential those contributions were. The Council had seen humans as junior partners, useful, but not critical. Now they were learning the difference between partnership and dependency. The expedition to Sol system could not launch soon enough. The joint expedition fleet approached Sol system with a mixture of hope and dread that weighed heavy in the hearts of every crew member. Admiral Zexhai commanded the flotilla from his flagship, a sleek Zalani cruiser equipped with the most advanced sensors the Council could provide. Beside him sailed ships from 6 other species, each contributing their best technology to solve the mystery of humanity's disappearance. Approaching the heliopause, reported Navigation Officer Kil Wen from her station. Solar system boundaries. Detected. No response to our diplomatic hails. The silence from humanity's home system was complete and absolute, just as it had been for the past year. Not even automated beacons or navigation aids responded to their calls. Dr. Vel Tanis, the expedition's chief scientist, monitored his instruments with growing confusion. The Corvin researcher had expected to find debris fields, signs of evacuation, or evidence of some catastrophic event that had forced humanity to abandon their colonies. Instead, his sensors detected something far more unsettling: perfect normalcy. All human installations appear intact and operational, he reported to Admiral Zexhai. Power signatures are normal. Life support systems are active. Orbital facilities maintain proper positioning and attitude. There are no signs of damage, destruction, or emergency evacuation. The Admiral's 3 eyes narrowed as he processed this information. An intact but empty solar system was far more mysterious than ruins would have been. The fleet's first stop was Europa Station, humanity's premier research facility orbiting Jupiter. As their shuttles approached the massive installation, the alien, visitors could see lights in the windows, functioning atmospheric processors, and perfectly maintained external structures. The docking bays opened automatically when they requested permission to board, as if the station was welcoming expected guests. Inside Europa Station, the expedition team found something that chilled them to their cores. Dr. Helen Price's laboratory was exactly as she had left it, equipment powered down in proper sequence, research materials carefully stored, personal belongings neatly arranged. But there was no sign of Helen herself or any other human being. The medical bay contains active cultures of 17 different species, reported Dr. Mordun as he examined Helen's work. These samples represent treatments for diseases we thought were incurable. But the procedures... He paused, reviewing data files that made no sense. The procedures operate on principles I do not recognize. She was using quantum cellular manipulation techniques that our science says are impossible. In the agricultural research sections, Dr. Amy Foster's work told a similar story. Her laboratory contained seeds and soil samples from hundreds of worlds, along with genetic modification equipment that seemed simple until the aliens tried to understand how it worked. The machines operated on biological principles that challenged their understanding of how life itself functioned. She was not just improving crops, whispered Dr. Velmar as he studied Amy's notes. She was teaching them to live better. These genetic modifications enhance not just growth and yield, but the plant's ability to communicate with their environment, to adapt to changing conditions, to form symbiotic relationships with soil organisms. It is as if she understood the language of life itself. The expedition's most shocking discovery came when they reached Admiral Pete Jackson's military installations on the outer planets. The defensive systems he had designed appeared straightforward. Sensor arrays, weapon platforms, communication networks. But when the alien military experts tried to understand how these systems achieved their legendary effectiveness, they found technologies that operated beyond their comprehension. The targeting computers use probability calculations that include variables we cannot identify, reported Commander Haxter after studying Pete's tactical systems. The defensive algorithms predict enemy behavior with accuracy rates that approach precognition. The weapon systems achieve destructive effects that exceed their apparent energy output by factors of 10 or more. On Mars, the expedition found the personal quarters that Jake Morrison had maintained during his years as Earth's ambassador. His private study contained diplomatic files that revealed the true scope of humanity's contributions to galactic civilization. The record showed not just the obvious achievements, but thousands of small interventions, quiet solutions, and behind-the-scenes fixes that had prevented crises the other species never knew they faced. He was not just representing humanity, Admiral Zexhai realized as he read Jake's private journals. He was managing the entire council. Look at these files. Trade disputes resolved before they became conflicts. Resource allocation problems solved before they caused shortages. Territorial disagreements settled before they led to wars. Humanity was not just a member of galactic civilization. They were its immune system. The most disturbing discovery came from the personal logs left behind by ordinary humans. Nurse Katie Wells had documented her work with alien patients in detail, revealing medical understanding that went far beyond what her training should have provided. Engineer Bob Turner's technical notes showed innovations that seemed to violate the laws of physics. Even the most junior human technicians had been operating with knowledge that surpassed the galaxy's greatest experts. They were hiding their true capabilities Dr. Veltanis concluded after reviewing hundreds of personnel files. Every human we worked with was deliberately simplifying their knowledge, using only techniques we could understand and accept. They made their contributions seem normal, even primitive, when they were actually operating on scientific principles we have not yet discovered. In the deepest archives of Luna Base, the expedition found humanity's true history with the Galactic Council. The records showed decades of careful observation and documentation, as humans slowly realized that their alien partners were becoming increasingly authoritarian and intolerant of diversity. The files contained detailed analyses of council voting, patterns, political trends, and social changes that painted a disturbing picture of galactic civilization's gradual slide toward uniformity and control. They saw what we were becoming before we saw it ourselves, Admiral Zexhai told his senior staff as they reviewed the evidence. The unification protocol was not the beginning of the Council's authoritarianism. It was the culmination of trends that humanity had been tracking for decades. The final revelation came from Dr. Helen Price's personal research files, hidden in encrypted storage, that took the expedition's best cryptographers days to break. Inside, they found evidence that humanity had been preparing for their departure for over 20 years. Hidden supply caches, secret research projects, autonomous manufacturing systems, closed-loop agricultural techniques, everything they would need to thrive in isolation from galactic civilization. They did not leave in anger, Dr. Veltanis realized as he studied the preparations. They left in disappointment. They gave us decades to change course, subtle warnings that we ignored, quiet protests that we dismissed. When the unification protocol passed preliminary voting, they simply activated plans they had hoped never to use. The expedition spent 6 months in Sol System, documenting everything they could find. But the more they learned, the more they realized how little they had understood about their human partners. Humanity had not just been members of galactic civilization. They had been its secret guardians, its hidden foundation, its quiet conscience. And now they were gone, taking with them knowledge and capabilities that the galaxy was only beginning to appreciate. The empty installations of Sol System stood as monuments to a partnership that had been taken for granted until it was too late to save. As the expedition fleet prepared to return to Council space with their disturbing findings, Admiral Zexhai looked back at Earth one final time. The blue and green world turned peacefully in its orbit, beautiful and pristine, and utterly lifeless. Somewhere in the distant darkness, humanity had found a new home among the stars. But they would never return to the galaxy that had failed to value what it had possessed. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened 3 days after the expedition fleet returned from Sol System. Chairman Vextar stood before the assembled representatives, his 3 eyes reflecting the weight of what they had discovered. The great chamber that had once housed 47 species now echoed with the voices of only 31. 16 member worlds had fallen to external threats or withdrawn into isolation since humanity's departure. Fellow representatives, Vextar began, his voice carrying across the chamber, what we found in human space challenges everything we believed about our former partners. Behind him, holographic displays showed images from the expedition, empty but pristine facilities, advanced technologies beyond their understanding, and records that painted a picture none of them wanted to accept. Admiral Zexhai stepped forward to present the military findings. Humanity's defensive capabilities were not primitive as we assumed. They were deliberately simplified for our consumption. Their true technology operates on principles we are only beginning to recognize. The hologram shifted to show Pete Jackson's tactical systems, weapons that achieved impossible accuracy, and defensive algorithms that seemed to predict the future. In the medical section, Dr. Mordun's findings were equally disturbing. Dr. Alan Brooks was not just treating symptoms. His medical techniques manipulated quantum states at the cellular level. He could cure diseases by correcting probability matrices, in biological systems. We called his methods intuitive, but they were actually applications of sciences we do not possess. The agricultural revelations struck deepest of all. Dr. Velmar, the wisp botanist who had worked closely with Amy Foster, floated near the chamber's ceiling as he spoke. Amy Foster understood life itself in ways we cannot comprehend. She did. Not just modify plants genetically. She taught them to evolve, to adapt, to form connections with their environment that transcended our understanding of biology. Her crops were not just improved, they were elevated to a higher form of existence. But the most devastating revelations came from the political archives that Jake Morrison had left behind. The holographic display showed decades of careful documentation as humanity watched the Galactic Council's gradual transformation from a cooperative alliance into an authoritarian regime. Every vote, every policy change, every restriction on member world autonomy had been recorded and analyzed. They saw what we were becoming, Vexistar said, his voice heavy with shame. The genetic purity laws that required species modification for council membership. The resource allocation protocols that centralized all trade through council oversight. The cultural standardization acts that eliminated disruptive traditions. Humanity documented our slide toward tyranny while we convinced ourselves we were creating unity. The unification protocol that had triggered humanity's departure was displayed in all its terrible detail. The law would have required all member species to undergo genetic modification to meet council standards of biological efficiency. Cultural practices deemed incompatible with galactic unity would be banned. Individual world governments would be replaced by council-appointed administrators. In the name of peace and prosperity, the council had voted to eliminate the diversity that made civilization worth preserving. Jake Morrison's private notes reveal that humanity tried to warn us, Vexitar continued. Subtle objections in council, sessions. Diplomatic protests filed through proper channels, requests for amendments and compromises. They spent decades trying to guide us away from authoritarianism while maintaining their public support for council unity. The record showed that humanity's final attempt to prevent the unification protocol had been Jake's impassioned speech before the preliminary vote. He had argued that diversity was not a weakness to be eliminated, but a strength to be celebrated. He had warned that forcing unity would destroy the very qualities that made galactic civilization worth protecting. His words had been ignored, dismissed as primitive human sentimentality. Dr. Helen Price's personal files revealed the true scope of humanity's preparations for departure. For 20 years, they had been developing closed-loop technologies that would allow them to thrive without galactic trade networks. Secret research projects had created manufacturing systems that could produce anything they needed from basic raw materials. Hidden agricultural programs had developed crops that could grow in any environment without external support. They hoped they would never need to use these preparations, Dr. Veltanis reported. Dr. Price's notes indicate that humanity genuinely wanted to remain part of galactic civilization, but they also understood that some principles are worth more than convenience or comfort. When we forced them to choose between their values and their membership, they chose their values. The expedition had also discovered evidence of humanity's alternative plans for galactic exploration. Deep space. Telescopes had identified potentially habitable systems in distant galaxies. Experimental faster-than-light drives had been tested in secret. Generation ships capable of supporting human populations for centuries had been constructed in hidden shipyards beyond the solar system's edge. They were not just planning to leave, Admiral Zex High explained. They were planning to thrive. The same innovative spirit that made them valuable council members would serve them well as independent explorers. They did not need us. We needed them. But perhaps the most painful discovery was the evidence of humanity's genuine affection for their alien partners. Personal journals and private communications showed that individual humans had formed real friendships with members of other species. They had genuinely enjoyed cultural exchanges, collaborative research projects, and diplomatic partnerships. Their departure had not been motivated by hatred or revenge, but by sadness and disappointment. Katie Wells wrote in her final log entry that leaving felt like abandoning family. Dr. Mordun read from his report. Bob Turner's notes express hope that the Council would eventually learn from their departure and return to the cooperative ideals that had originally founded galactic civilization. Even as they prepared to leave forever, they wished us well. The chamber fell silent as the full weight of the revelations settled on the assembled representatives. They had not just lost valuable allies, they had driven away the species that had been quietly holding their civilization together, solving problems they never knew existed, preventing crises they never saw coming. The question now, Chairman Vextar said into the silence, is what we do with this knowledge. Do we attempt to find humanity and beg for their return? Do we try to rebuild what we have lost using their abandoned technologies? Or do we accept that some mistakes cannot be undone and focus on preventing future tragedies? In the weeks that followed, desperate attempts were made to locate humanity's new home. Deep space probes were launched toward distant galaxies. Communication arrays broadcast apologies and pleas for forgiveness across the cosmic void. Search fleets scoured star systems looking for any trace of human activity, but the universe remained silent. Humanity had vanished as completely as if they had never existed, taking with them the knowledge and wisdom that had made galactic civilization possible. The Council was left to face the consequences of their choices, wondering if they would ever again see the steady hand and quiet competence that had once guided them through the darkness between the stars. The age of human partnership was over. The age of consequences had begun. 2 years after humanity's silent departure, Chairman Vextar stood alone in the council chamber that had once buzzed with the voices of 47 species. Now only 28 representatives remained, their scattered seating creating a stark reminder of how much had been lost. The great hall felt empty despite the alien dignitaries present, as if the absence of one particular species had somehow drained the life from the entire institution. The reports that crossed Vextar's desk each morning painted a grim picture of galactic civilization's decline. The Outer Rim colonies, once humanity's proud achievement in expanding civilized space, had fallen one by one to the savage worlds. Without Pete Jackson's tactical genius or the early warning systems that Sam Rodriguez had built, the frontier, defenses crumbled like sand castles before a rising tide. Governor Meltara of Haven's Edge had been among the first to die when the savage worlds finally attacked. Her final transmission, broadcast across what remained of the communication network, haunted every council member who heard it. "We held the line for 6 hours." Her voice had crackled through the static. 6 hours against a force that Pete Jackson would have stopped in 6 minutes? Tell the council that their unity cost us everything. The agricultural crisis had spread beyond the farming worlds to affect entire systems. On New Eden, Administrator Helgon had been forced to evacuate 3/4 of his population when crop failures made the planet unable to support its inhabitants. The seeds that Amy Foster had developed still grew, but without her understanding of the subtle relationships between plants, soil, and environment, yields dropped so low that starvation became inevitable. "We tried everything," Helgon reported to the council during one of his final transmissions before evacuation. "We followed her procedures exactly, used her equipment precisely, maintained her growing conditions perfectly. But something was missing. She understood life in ways we cannot learn from manuals or databases. Her knowledge died with her departure. The medical catastrophe was equally devastating. Dr. Morden watched helplessly as diseases that Alan Brooks had controlled for decades returned with a vengeance. The Keth respiratory syndrome, Zalani bone rot, and Corvin cellular decay all surged back to epidemic levels. His medical centers, once showcases of interspecies healthcare cooperation, became overcrowded chambers where patients died from ailments that had been trivial to treat just 2 years earlier. "I have Alan's procedures memorized," he told his exhausted staff during another sleepless night. "I can recite his treatment protocols word for word, but medicine is not just procedures and protocols. It requires understanding the connection between mind and body, hope and healing, that only he seemed to possess. We treated symptoms. He healed souls. The communication network that had once united hundreds of worlds continued its inexorable decay." Chief Engineer Corvell had tried everything to maintain Sam Rodriguez's quantum entanglement arrays, but without understanding the principles that made them work, his efforts were like trying to repair a symphony with a hammer. Message delays that had started as minutes grew to hours, then days, then weeks. "The network is dying," he reported to what remained of the communication authority. "Not failing, dying, as if it was a living system that requires something we cannot provide. Without Mr. Rodriguez's maintenance routines, it loses coherence at a mathematically precise rate. In another year, we will be reduced to light-speed communication across interstellar distances." The economic collapse accelerated as trade networks fragmented and manufacturing chains broke down. On Ironheart, factory manager Belthar had been forced to close the production lines that had supplied advanced technology to half the galaxy. Without human consultants, without communication networks, without secure trade routes, the complex web of galactic commerce had simply fallen apart. Thakmor's mining operations in the Vega system finally shut down completely when his extraction equipment stopped working altogether. Despite months of desperate maintenance attempts, the machines Bob Turner had left behind gradually lost their miraculous efficiency until they could barely process raw ore. The Corvin engineer's final report was a masterpiece of frustrated confusion. The D. "Equipment operates perfectly according to all specifications," he wrote. "Every component functions within normal parameters. All settings match the original configurations. Yet production has dropped to zero. It is as if the machines have forgotten how to mine. I am convinced that Turner's knowledge was not just technical, but somehow spiritual. He did not just operate the equipment. He communed with it." Chairman Vexitar aged rapidly under the weight of failure and responsibility. His once proud bearing had become stooped, his ceremonial robes hung loose on his diminished frame, and his 3 eyes had lost their former brightness. The council sessions he presided over were exercises in damage control rather than governance, desperate attempts to manage cascading crises rather than guide galactic development. "We have become caretakers of decline," he confided to his personal aide, young Zilpak, during one of their private conversations. "Every decision we make is about choosing which disaster to address first, which crisis to ignore for another day. We are no longer leading civilization forward. We are simply trying to prevent it from collapsing completely." The search for humanity had consumed enormous resources without producing any meaningful results. Deep space probes launched toward distant galaxies had found no trace of human activity. Communication arrays broadcasting across the cosmic void received only silence in return. The universe had swallowed humanity as completely as if they had never existed. But then, on a routine survey mission in an unexplored region of space, long-range sensors detected something that made every alien heart skip a beat. Far beyond the galactic rim, in a cluster of stars so distant that light from them had not yet reached council space, energy signatures appeared that matched human technology, not the simplified versions humanity had used within the council, but their true capabilities operating without restraint. "They are not hiding," Admiral Zexhai reported after analyzing the sensor data. "They are building. The energy outputs we detect suggest massive construction projects, possibly entire worlds being terraformed using technologies we cannot comprehend. They have found new homes, new partners, new purposes. The revelation that humanity was not just surviving, but Thriving in their exile struck the remaining council species with a mixture of hope and despair. Hope that their former partners were well, despair that they had lost something truly irreplaceable. The brief transmissions intercepted from that distant region suggested that humanity had encountered new species, formed new alliances, shared their knowledge with beings who appreciated rather than controlled it. Chairman Vextar stood in his private office, looking out at stars that seemed colder and more distant than they had when humanity was part of galactic civilization. The reports from across Council space told the same story. A once great alliance reduced to a struggling confederation of worlds, barely able to maintain basic services. The vision of unity through uniformity had produced only weakness and decay. "They tried to tell us," he whispered to the darkness beyond his window. "For decades, they tried to warn us that strength comes from diversity, that cooperation cannot be forced, that some prices are too high to pay for false unity. We convinced ourselves that their objections were primitive sentiment when they were actually advanced wisdom." The empty chair in the council chamber where Jake Morrison had once sat had become an unofficial memorial to humanity's absence. No other species had been invited to fill the position, partly from respect, partly from the growing realization that no one else could fill it. The steady voice of reason, the quiet competence, the innovative solutions to impossible problems, all had departed with the humans, leaving behind only the memory of what had been lost. In his final entry in the council records, Chairman Vextar wrote words that would be studied by future historians as the epitaph of the First Galactic Alliance. "We sought to create perfection through control and achieved only mediocrity through fear. We demanded conformity from those who offered diversity, unity from those who provided strength, submission from those who gave freely of their gifts. In our arrogance, we believed we could improve upon partnership by making it mandatory. We learned too late that some departures are permanent, some wisdom cannot be replaced, and some silence speaks louder than any words ever could." The age of the First Galactic Council was ending not with war or catastrophe, but with the quiet recognition that they had driven away the very qualities that made their civilization worth preserving. Somewhere among distant stars, humanity had found new homes and new hopes. But for those they left behind, the silence of their departure would echo through the centuries as a reminder of what happens when diversity is sacrificed on the altar of uniformity, and when the quiet voices of wisdom are ignored until they choose to speak no more.